What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. Phenomenal episode lined up for you this week because we've got our old friend of the podcast, BC head coach Jeff Hafley is with us to talk all things Zay Flowers, the maybe diminutive receiver out of BC, but ultra quick, extremely fast, all kinds of shifty. You can't stick with him on an option route. This guy might be the quickest receiver in this year's draft class. Zay Flowers, to me, feels like the ultimate Patriots slot receiver, but he gives you a little bit more on top of it with the vertical ability because he did run in the low 4.2s at this year's combine. Yes, he's 5'9", about 180-ish pounds, so you're not going to ask him to live on the outside, but man, the way the Patriots, generally speaking, like to move around their receivers, use them in some different roles. Yes, you can occasionally use him in the screen game. Yes, you can occasionally use him as an end-around player, but he's not a quote-unquote gadget receiver. At least he's not strictly that. He can be much more for the Patriots or really any team that drafts him, but obviously we're interested in his Patriots fit, and this is a link that it feels like is being made more and more often the closer we get to the draft. I had him going to the Patriots in my most recent mock draft. I had the Patriots trading down to number 25 overall with the Jaguars. And this is what I wrote recently. Again, this is on the website, NBC Sports Boston, about the fit between Flowers and the Patriots. They go with the kind of receiver who will make their quarterback and new offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien giddy, with or without Jacoby Myers. And we know now that Jacoby Myers is gone, although Juju Smith-Schuster is in, and he's a slot player. This still applies. I said here in the story, the Patriots could afford to add a quick as a hiccup type of player for Mac Jones. Flowers, right there with Jackson Smith and Jigba from Ohio State, is among the shiftiest wideouts in the class. For Bill O'Brien, who we know has the ability to free up slot receivers in this Patriots offense, you'll remember Wes Welker had a little bit of success with Bill O'Brien as the OC here in Foxborough. Flowers would be a dynamic do-it-all type. Short to intermediate routes, end-arounds, screens, but there's more to his game than that. Flowers doesn't look like a classic down-the-field threat at 5'9", 182, but he can test corners and safeties deep with the juice that he possesses. His combination of speed and explosiveness, packaged in a smaller frame, is a little reminiscent of a guy Jones loved throwing to at Alabama, Jalen Waddle. That would be some real dynamism to be able to add to your offense. That would be true explosiveness to be able to add to your offense. The ability to use that guy in a variety of different ways. Yes, he can go vertical for you, but you don't have to live with him in that role. You don't have to throw it 20-plus yards down the field to get a 20-plus yard gain from somebody like Zay Flowers. Jalen Waddle gets it all over the field, and he has the ability to take it to the house at any given moment. I feel maybe he doesn't have the same top-end speed that Waddle has, but he's not far off. And he does have the ability, in my opinion, to turn a small or a short throw into a massive, massive chunk gain. Before we get to our interview with Jeff Hafley, let's play for you a clip from the great ESPN senior draft analyst, Mel Kiper, another friend of the podcast. Hopefully we'll be able to get him on this year before this year's draft. But Mel Kiper just did a conference call with a variety of reporters from around the country to take all kinds of draft questions. Here's what he had to say this week about Zay Flowers.
Which wide receiver has the best in-game speed, not necessarily the 40-yard dash time?
That's a great question on in-game speed because that's all that matters. That really is all that matters. I think that the quickest guy is Zay Flowers to me out of Boston College. He's electric with the ball in his hands. People say he has these drops. I don't see them. I've watched a lot of Zay Flowers. I saw a couple, but it was nothing was on him. Ball was not perfect. And he was trying to run before the catch. I don't see that. I think his hands are really good. He's a great kid.
Electric with the ball in his hands. That's something to me that the Patriots could really use. I think they need a separator. You know, they have Juju Smith-Schuster, who is the big slot. And if you want to use him in 11 personnel and you want to use him to block, he can do that for you. He's tough. He is big. He's got good size. He's a little thicker than Jacoby Myers was, although Jacoby Myers was a fantastic blocker at the receiver position in his own right. You could do some of the same things with Juju Smith-Schuster. You could ask him to pick up some yards after catch for you, but he's not a separator, even though he works in the middle of the field. He doesn't have that kind of explosive quickness that the lower cut, lower to the ground type of player, the way Zay Flowers is, would have. That's just, they are two different roles in my opinion, quite honestly. And the Patriots just haven't had that low cut, low to the ground slot receiver in years, really since Danny Amendola. Julian Edelman obviously played some in the slot, but he was really more versatile than a true slot receiver like Wes Welker or Troy Brown even. That kind of presence in this Patriots offense, again, with Bill O'Brien back in the mix, to me could do wonders for their overall success rate. And so it feels as though Kiper is in the same box. I wonder how high in the draft Zay Flowers will go. Would the Patriots have to use their number 14 overall selection on him in order to feel as though they could lock him up, that they would be certain they would get him if they do fall in love with him during this pre-draft process? Or could they trade back, pick up a little extra? Sorry, 3, 2, 1. Or do they trade back, pick up an extra pick? If you trade all the way down to 24, 25, you're talking about maybe being able to add a second round pick this year to the haul of picks that you already have. And the Patriots are already in the double digits in terms of the picks that they have across the weekend, this draft weekend. So that's what would be interesting to me if they want that kind of player. Now, would you, if you're Bill Belichick, would you even put Zay Flowers, or would you put the receiver position in general at the top of your list in terms of needs? And that's what the Patriots often do in the first round, guys. And we've talked about it on this podcast before. But if you look at their first round history, they look for their most glaring need and they fill it. They did it last year at right guard with Cole Strange after trading Shaq Mason. They did it at receiver in 2019 with N'Keal Harry. They did it at tackle in 2018 with Isaiah Wynn. He didn't end up playing that year, but I think people forget sometimes the guy who ended up starting for them at left tackle that season, took you to a Super Bowl, was Trent Brown. They didn't have Trent Brown until later in the draft. So they went and they used that first round pick. They had 2 that year. They also felt they had a need at running back, which we could debate whether or not that was a great pick. But they went with left tackle with their first pick. And maybe they end up doing that again. Maybe they feel like Riley Reif isn't a starter for them. They don't want him starting, and they go and they get a right tackle, and they take Darnell Wright out of Tennessee. 330 pounds, great athlete, stonewalled Will Anderson again and again and again against Alabama last year. Maybe that's the route they go. Or maybe they look at corner. They did bring Jalen Mills back on a modified contract, but maybe they look at him and they say, we'd like to have him at safety, and we'd like to play John Jones in the slot. That's really where he's best. So we do need a boundary corner opposite, say it's Jack Jones, who they peg as their number 2 guy. Then maybe you're talking about a Christian Gonzalez or a Joey Porter Jr., maybe even a Deontay Banks out of Maryland in the first round in this year's draft. Maybe that's how they view it. But if they look at Bill O'Brien and Bill O'Brien looks at this offense and he says, I could really use somebody who's going to actually separate on third down. That's not Devontae Parker. That's not Juju Smith-Schuster. It's not Mike Gesicki. It's really not Hunter Henry. Kendrick Bourne, maybe it could be. Maybe it could be. You use him in sort of that slot Z role, not the pure slot role, but the Z move him all over the formation type of role. But that's not necessarily Kendrick Bourne's game either. Again, he's not that low-cut option route, same style of player that the Patriots have loved. That would be Zay Flowers. I think Bill O'Brien would love him. I think Mac Jones would love him. I think the Patriots and their fans would love him as well. For all those reasons, he just feels like somebody who could give this offense the juice it needs to be something closer to elite going into 2023. And in my opinion, that's what you need to be, an elite offense, in order to have a chance, in order to truly contend. Could they make the playoffs without an elite offense? Sure, they did it 2 years ago. Will they make any noise in the playoffs without an elite offense? I don't think so. So to me, I would still be looking at receiver, and I'd still be looking at somebody who can turn a short throw into a huge gain. And Zay Flowers would be near the top of my list as far as it goes with those types of weapons. Quentin Johnston, who we've talked about on the podcast before, phenomenal at breaking tackles. He's a big body. You could throw it to him down the field as well. Maybe he's gone before the Patriots are even on the clock at 14. Same for Jackson Smith and Jigba. But Flowers is somebody who, in my opinion, would certainly be available at that 14 range, and maybe even available if they were to trade back, which we know Bill Belichick loves to do. If he feels confident, he can get the player he loves. All right, let's talk to another coach who loves himself some Zay Flowers. Not surprisingly, It's Jeff Hafley from BC. Great conversation with Jeff. It's awesome to have him on the pod right around this time, just about every year, because there's always somebody we should be talking about coming from the heights that's going in the first round. This year it's Zay Flowers. Jeff Hafley has all sorts of interesting things that you are going to love hearing, whether it's on the field or off, when it comes to Zay Flowers and his experience with Flowers at BC. Without further ado, let's get to Jeff Hafley right now. Very excited now to have with us head coach of the Boston College Eagles, Jeff Hafley. Jeff, thanks so much for being with us here on the podcast, man.
I appreciate having me back on. It's always good around this time when you're talking about one of our guys.
And there's always somebody to talk about. And we talked with you last year about Zion Johnson. He obviously ends up going in the first round. I remember a couple off seasons ago, though, Jeff, first talking with you about Zay Flowers, who's now talked about as a potential first round pick in this year's draft class. And this was 2 off seasons ago. And I said toward the end of our conversation, I said, hey, this guy, Zay Flowers, he really looks like a great Patriots fit. And I don't know if you remember this, but at the time, again, 2 off seasons ago, you said, you got to give me one more year with the guy. So he was going into the 2021 season. You were saying, you got to give me 2022 as well. You got to give me 2022. I know you've been excited about him for a long time. How excited are you for him now as he goes through this process here?
I'm really excited for him. He's such a great kid, and what he meant to this program, and how he did it, and the message he kind of sent about our culture and to the young players on this team. You're right. I mean, I remember that conversation, and to be truthful with you, last year at this time, I thought he was going to enter the draft, and I think a lot of people were trying to get him to enter the draft, and he probably would have done the same thing, run fast, look great, but he still needed to develop. He wanted to get his degree. And I'm really glad he came back. He broke every BC record, and I think he's now positioned himself to be a first-round pick, which is what we kept telling him he had a chance to be. If he put some size on and developed and did a little bit more in those contested catches. He's also a kid who was one of the first kids in this new crazy college football world to try to get poached with a lot of money. More money than he probably ever thought he'd have at that point. And instead, he decided to stay loyal to me, to the program, to the staff, and had, in my opinion, one of the best years out of any wide receiver in the country. So I'm really hoping his name gets called that first day.
What did it say to you, the fact that Zay, as you mentioned, he could have gone to the draft last year? I know he has a big family. I know he's close with his dad, Willie, and he's talked about it pretty openly. The ability to be able to help out that family would mean a lot to him. He could have done that a year ago. He could have gone elsewhere. You're right, with the NIL was reported. I saw in ESPN that he was offered maybe $600,000 to go play for another school that wasn't Boston College. So what does it say to you about his character? Some of the intangible things that I know teams are trying to find out about players at this time of year. Not only that he came back to play, but that he came back to play for you at BC.
Yeah, I forget about what it says to me. I mean, that's already been done. I mean, he's done enough here and he's done enough for me. I think now it's what it says to all those GMs, to all the owners, and to all the head coaches. I mean, it's pretty well documented. Last year, there were a bunch of guys who did get poached illegally, took the money and went and left their team, that they came in with, played with, and left to go play for somebody else for money. Zay was one of those guys who had the opportunity. He called me. He told me everything was going on. I mean, it was very real, and we had multiple conversations. The fact that he came and talked to me, it showed me he wanted to stay, and we weren't going to match that money. But he wanted to stay for the right reasons. He knew exactly how we'd use him. He knew he'd develop under our offensive coaches. He wanted to get his degree. More importantly, he wanted to stick it out with his teammates, and there's a loyalty factor. And he wanted to remain loyal to our staff. So if you're an NFL head coach and you're a GM and you see that loyalty, and it doesn't just have some kid sit at the combine and talk about character. He showed it. He showed it in a really hard situation where this kid doesn't come for much. He had a chance to get a ton of money, but he chose not to do that. And I think that's very rare. And I think that's what people are going to get. They're going to get a great human being who will do anything for his teammate and his staff. And then you turn on the film and you see how good of a player he is. I said it about Zion last year. I think Zay's a safe pick. You know exactly what you're getting. And I think at that position, it's even more rare, because you don't always get that. And if I'm a GM or a head coach or I'm a receiver coach in that league, I want Zay on my team. And if I'm a quarterback, I want Zay on my team. If I'm a defensive guy, I want Zay on my team. Last year at the end of the year, we didn't have a lot of success. Zay continued to play. There's a lot of guys who would have opted out and said, Coach, I'm not putting my body at risk playing at the end of the year, the last 2 games when there was no postseason for us. And if you turn on those clips, he's blocking harder downfield than most people in college football. So I'm not talking about his receptions. I'm not talking about his run after the catch. I'm not talking about him breaking every record ever set here. I'm talking about why Zay is different than most people and why he'll be a good pro for a long time.
And you mentioned some of the adversity that your team went through last year. I know you dealt with a bunch of injuries, top offensive linemen, the quarterback misses about a month. And the end of the season, things weren't, ideal for you guys. But the focus and the poise and the determination, I would say, for Zay to continue to play. I mean, he broke every record at BC. He has this great year in a situation that's not perfect. What does it tell you about, some of the on the field intangibles, but also Jeff, just his sheer talent? You've been around a lot of talented guys. For him to have the year he had in the situation that he was in, he's got to be pretty special in terms of what he brings to the table on the field.
Yeah, and I think you hit it, what Zay has done. Look, we had 5 offensive linemen have surgery throughout the course of last year. We didn't play with the same offensive line back-to-back weeks, I don't think, until week 9 or 10. He was our offense. And I think if you can find out in college what you're going to get when things get really hard, I think it's pretty important, because in that league, when you don't have a good year, you want to know what you're going to get from your best players. You got to watch his end of the year tape. In a tough time, he never stopped. He was our hardest practice player, which is what I've said to everybody the moment they come in that building. He's a guy that has this presence where he completely lights up a room. He's one of those guys where you would never know if he was having a bad day. He never makes it about himself. He just goes out and works. And then you want to talk about his talent, and people can talk about him not being very tall, but he's strong. And I think the knock on him this year was the contested catches down the field. Well, he answered that. Turn on the tape and watch his contested catches. He went up and he took the ball away from people. He got stronger. I think he played in the mid to high 170s, and now he's like 183, 185. I saw him yesterday. He looks great, and he's still running in the low 4.4s. His ability to stop and start and anticipate where defenders are going to be and make them miss the initial miss. I'm not sure if I've ever been around a guy like him, and that's coaching DBs in the NFL and now being back in college. He's just different, and he's not a guy who's just going to be a jet sweep, bubble screen, reverse guy. He can run intermediate routes. He can catch and run, and he can catch the ball down the field. I just think he has a skill set that not many people do, and I think you could put him in the slot, and he could create a lot of mismatches. And I also think you could put him on the outside and throw the ball to him down the field. So he's really developed, become a complete wide receiver. And I think it's your on and off the field that makes him a really great pick. That I'd be really surprised if he got to the second round.
You just mentioned some of the traits that he brings, which are outstanding, the ones that people often highlight in his game. What would you say is his superpower, Jeff? I remember last year we talked about Zion Johnson. You called him a superhero in terms of his work ethic and just being such a pro and mature and everything physically that he brought to the table as well. But if there's a superpower for Zay's game, what do you think it is?
Well, one, I don't think the guy ever gets tired. I mean, this guy, when you watch him practice, he could run 10 go balls in a row, and he's got this huge smile on his face, and he barely sweats. So some people have it. I don't know how he does it, but he never looks tired. He never looks frustrated. That, I think, is a huge intangible. But the ability he has as soon as he catches the ball to just have this feel for where people are and make them miss right away, I don't know how he does it. He's very hard to tackle. Then the other thing is, I get it. He's not tall, right? So people are going to knock him because it's a big man's league. Everybody wants bigger guys on the edge. He very rarely takes a direct hit because he can make people miss, and he's hard to tackle. He's got great balance. He's got really good play strength. And when you really watch his tape, he doesn't just go to the ground very easily. He usually winds up hitting a knee and popping back up. Those are the things that I would say that people probably wouldn't know about him unless you really dive into the film. You can talk about the other stuff. I mean, just, turn on the tape and watch it yourself.
And Mel Kiper spoke to something that you spoke to earlier when it comes to contested catches and people maybe having questions about his hands. I mean, this time of year, Jeff, you were in the NFL, long enough to know everybody's looking for, the pro aisle of traits or characteristics to talk about, but also the cons. And so that sometimes will come up with Zay. But Kiper said, he thinks he's the quickest receiver in the draft. He said he's electric with the ball in his hands. He says people say he has these drops. I don't see them. Nothing was on him. The ball wasn't always perfect. I think his hands are really good. So it sounds like you feel the same way in terms of how that grew and developed. How did he work on his hands over the course of his time with you at BC, Jeff?
I never thought hands were any issue for Zay. I think Zay's got really good hands. I don't know where the drops are coming from. I think the knock coming into the year was the contested ball down the field with people in his face. Could he go up and take it away? And we definitely worked on that with him. And I think Darryl Wyatt, our wide receiver coach, did an unbelievable job. I think the development of Zay and the thing that was a benefit for him staying was when we got here, he was a guy that was going to be handed jet sweeps and throwing bubbles, and he wasn't a great route runner. And even when I first got here, you saw him kind of do some things, and I remember I said to a bunch of people, gosh, wait until this kid learns how to really run the route tree and run it the right way. Wait until this kid learns how to release off the line of scrimmage. I mean, he's so hard to press. He'll reduce his surface area and get so skinny and low to the ground that he's so hard to get his hands on. But he worked at it, and he became a complete wide receiver. And it's another benefit that he stayed because he's now ready to play. This isn't going to be something – I don't think there's going to be a big learning curve for him. I think he's a really good player, and he became more well-rounded. But I don't know where the drop thing is coming from. And I would be honest, if I thought that was an issue, I just don't see it.
Do you have a comp, Jeff, for somebody that maybe our listeners or our viewers would be able to associate with Zay's game and think of this NFL player, NFL name, and say, oh, okay, that makes sense to me now, if they haven't seen a ton of Zay Flowers? I mean, you were with some great receivers, some great young receivers when you were at Ohio State. Chris Olave was there, and Garrett Wilson was there. Jameson Williams, I believe, was there as well. But you also coached against, you mentioned before, as a DB's coach, you coached against some great receivers in the NFC West. And they had Brandon Cooks, who was sort of an undersized, really fast guy, but also Cooper Kupp, Christian Kirk, Tyler Lockett, Antonio Brown and Steve Smith when you were in the AFC North. Like there's some really interesting names there. Is there anybody, though, that you would compare him to in terms of his ability on the field?
I don't know if I've been around a guy with his acceleration and make you miss if I've coached a guy like that. Playing against Lockett and Doug Baldwin and some of those guys and Cooks, certainly you compare some of the size, the acceleration. I saw Steve Smith is a big fan of his. Looking through the combine stuff, I thought he was one of the best, toughest guys ever to play against, and his mindset. I mean, you want to talk about a tough guy to play against, which was cool to hear him. But guys that are a little bit shorter in stature, not as tall. I think he's a combination of some of those guys that you played against with that speed and acceleration, but he's also a really good route runner. I mean, you mentioned guys like Cooper Kupp who are really good option route runners. Zay's kind of got a little bit of a lot of those guys in him. I don't know if I've ever defended a guy quite like him, and that's not a knock on anybody else. And I'm not putting him above them. It's not like this one guy that he just reminded me of. He's got a lot of those qualities of a lot of the guys you did mention.
Would you think that his best fit in New England, Jeff, we're anticipating here, covering the Patriots, that it'll kind of get back to that offense that it was with Bill O'Brien when he was here as the offensive coordinator. And, that was the offense that Josh McDaniels ran and, Charlie Weiss before him. We always think of Patriots slot receivers as being these, quote unquote, undersized, shifty guys that can work the middle of the field. They really haven't had that the last few years. They've had Jacoby Myers play inside, but he's sort of a bigger slot. How well do you feel Zay's game would work sort of in that role at the NFL level?
Well, the role you just described, I mean, I think he'd crush it. I think putting him in the slot but he's a guy, he can run all those option routes, and he's going to be really hard to cover man-to-man. And then the catch and run element, I think he can take the top off in the slot, which you're starting to see a lot of people do. And some guys are going bigger in the slot now. It just depends what you're looking for. I think the ability to motion him and move him around, I think that's huge. And then I think he's also a guy that you can get the ball to in so many different ways, because he does have that ability, whether, I mean, you put him in the backfield, which people are doing, or you move him around and you hand him the ball or toss him the ball or throw him a screen, because he is a good catch and run guy too. Yeah, I think he'd fit in really well in a scheme that you're describing. I think he'd fit in well in most schemes, though. I think on third down, he's going to be a problem. I just think whoever gets him, I think he's very coachable. I think he's a really smart guy. We moved him around a lot this year and made it really hard for him, and he handled it really well. But I'd be very excited if he was staying home and close to us and we got a chance to continue to be around him, because he's such an exceptional guy. And just watching him come out to practice yesterday, again, with the smile, he just lights up a room, which everybody I talked to who interviewed him at the Combine, just the presence, the demeanor, the attitude, he's a great person that you kind of gravitate to.
Jeff, the last thing I want to ask you about Zay is, having spent as much time with him as you have, and I know we talked about some of the off the field decisions he had to make before the season, but is there a story that will always be sort of at the top of your mind when you think of Zay and you think about his love for football? It's something that we know Bill Belichick really values. Coaches everywhere value, I'm sure. You talk about just how much a guy really loves the game, and he's willing to spend that extra time on everything that he needs to maximize what he's been given in terms of abilities. Is there a story, whether it's in game or off the field or during practice, that you'll remember about your time with Zay?
Just practice in general. I mean, if you came and watched this guy practice, he was like the Energizer Bunny, and I mean that. And while he did so, it could be a long, hot day in training camp, and he just looks at you with this huge smile on his face and cracks a joke, and he's just that type of guy. The things that stand out the most for me is just, and I'll always remember, is you're playing the last game of the season, a meaningless game, and it is a night game, and it is freezing cold outside, and it is Thanksgiving break, so there's not a lot of people on campus, and watching him block down the field and finish the season the right way, it just says everything about the kid right there. Most people would have opted out or found a way, or were sore, or were hurt and didn't want to finish, or not risk getting hurt to prepare for the NFL draft or the Combine. Yet he smiled, he went out there, and he played harder than anybody on that field. And that, to me, says it all about him right there. And that's why I think he's going to have a great career.
Jeff, you're in the middle of spring ball right now. I think you guys are about a week into your spring ball practices at BC. How excited are you for this 2023 season upcoming here? Long build up to this thing, but I know you're fired up right now about what you have there at BC. Tell us a little bit about what you're looking forward to with this team.
Yeah, last year, we battled a lot of injuries with the O-line. The good news is that they're back. And then a guy who missed all of last year, who I think you and I could be talking about again next year at this time, Christian Mahogany, our right guard. I think he has a chance to be the best guard in all of college football, and potentially a first-round pick next year. He'll be back along with everybody else. And now we have depth because a lot of different guys played last year. This was a team, the last half of the season, I think 37 of the 44 in the two deep were first or second year players, and they got experience. So now they have that. They have a taste. So their attitude and their energy, the competitiveness, we have more depth now. We're starting to get a little bit older. So there's a different buzz, and it just makes them a lot of fun to coach, and it's a blast every day at practice.
Will be exciting to watch. It will be exciting to see Christian's rise over the course of the next year or so. I know there were people that we work with here at NBC Sports Boston, people in my family, Jeff, that are BC alums that were devastated when he was injured. Know he's a great player. Another BC guard just had sort of a market altering contract that he signed this offseason, and Chris Lindstrom. So that'll be a lot of fun to watch. We're looking forward to it, Jeff. And Jeff, thanks so much for spending so much time with us here to tell us a little bit more about Zay. I think people are getting more and more excited as we get closer to the draft about this possibility coming to fruition. A guy that they had the ability to watch the last several years here locally, maybe ending up with the pro team would be a lot of fun. So thanks for sharing all you have with us about Zay.
No problem. Thanks a lot for having me on.
All right, great stuff there from Jeff Hafley. As always, love hearing about the decision-making process for Zay Flowers and his commitment to the team there at BC, something that the Patriots, I think, would really value You love hearing about the commitment to blocking and the work being done late in the season when BC had, very little to play for. And Zay Flowers had a lot to lose were he to get injured late in that season. This guy was talked about as a first-round pick last offseason before going into the 2022 draft. He was going to be looking at something similar again. He had to know that going into the 2023 offseason, and yet he's still playing the way he's playing. He's still working the way he's working, according to Jeff. So those are all the intangible sorts of things that the Patriots would love. And Jeff mentioned it at one point during our conversation there. The intangible part of it is not something that's always associated with that position. It's sort of the nature of that position. You get the quote unquote diva receivers, especially in the first round. And I think the Patriots have had their experiences with those types of guys, and they haven't worked here. It sounds like Zay Flowers would be a little bit different, where he brings first round ability, even if it's not a quote unquote first round frame. He has first round ability, and he has everything else on top of it that you love off the field in terms of the work ethic. So for those reasons, you put them on top of in the Bill O'Brien offense, working with Mac Jones and that style of quarterback. Seems like a fit to me. But let us know what you think about Zay Flowers in the comments on YouTube. We appreciate our YouTube viewership. As always, every single week, you guys are the best. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review, leave us a rating. If you haven't already, subscribe for sure. If you haven't done that, tell your friends as well. We're going to make sure this podcast is chugging along at warp speed going into the draft. We want to give you all the best content we can. So if you do those things for us, rate, comment, subscribe, we're able to provide you with the best podcast humanly possible. All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to this edition of the Next Pats podcast. Keep an eye out next week for our next Pats episode. We'll talk to you then.